Nahmaduhu, we praise Him. Wa nusalli ala al-Kareem, we bless the Noble One. Amma ba'd, and after that, Na'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem, we seek refuge in the name of God from Satan, the cursed one. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We begin in the name of God, the merciful, the infinitely good. We have been meeting for the last week, and I have been addressing you, and we have been conversing in Urdu. But today, because we are going to deal with a subject that you will be dealing with in English, so I am going to then address you in English, so that we can get into the frame of mind of the technicalities of this subject. There are a few things I want to say about the English language, and before I begin, let me say that at any point you would like to interject and make a comment or a question or share your own experience or views, please feel free to do so. Now, we are going to do this in the English language because that is going to be, as the French say, your lingua franca. That is the language in which you already perhaps write your judgments, but coming to the commercial court, the expectation will be that your reasoning, your judgments, the arguments, by and large, will be in the English language. So for that, the English language is important. The other reason it's important is because commercial courts generally are known to attract foreign investment. So English language also gives us an international approach to things. Having said that, what I've learned in my experience is that we, being colonized in the subcontinent, our dependency on English means that we feel that all the knowledge that we have in English is the only knowledge. Ever since China started building its project, the One Belt, One Road project, which we call CPEC in Pakistan, I've met a number of Chinese specialists who are either Pakistani or Western. And they tell me that the narrative in Chinese, in Mandarin, is very different from English. So they always say, don't think that just because you read articles in English, whether they're newspapers, whether they're judgments, whether they're laws, that is the only perspective currently being practiced in the world. The Mandarin Chinese perspective on law, on investment, on foreign policy, on conflict or international maritime affairs is a very different perspective. So we use the English language knowing that there are other languages and there are other narratives. However, since we don't know Chinese, we are reliant on English. So it is English that we will use as our point of reference. The English-speaking world, there are, as you may know, two types of legal systems. Broadly, in the West, in the English-speaking world, the two types of legal systems are what is called the civil law system. It's also called the continental system, and then there is the common law system. The common law system is what we follow, and all the countries that were colonized by England, they follow the common law system. The continental civil law system is primarily applied in Europe, and there's a great difference in the approach that the civil law and common law systems adopt. One basic difference in the approach is that the civil law system is called inquisitorial, meaning asking questions, being inquisitive. The common law system, the approach is called adversarial, and that's the kind of litigation and practice that we have here. The reason I mention these two, the inquisitorial approach and the adversarial approach, is because over the decades and over the centuries, these two types have started merging and have started diluting. And the point at which they meet are commercial courts. because the new commercial courts that have been set up in different countries in the last, England is very old, so it's almost an exception. Most other countries who have set up commercial courts are fairly recent. So in the last, say, 20 to 30 years, the commercial courts have invented a hybrid system which has characteristics of both the adversarial common law system and also the inquisitorial civil law system. The main difference between the inquisitorial and the adversarial systems are that in the inquisitorial, i.e. the civil law systems, judges have a lot more participation in a case. So if you were to attend a hearing in France or Germany, you would see a very different nature of arguing a case. There, it is the judge who directs. So the two parties or opposing counsel, they don't compete in order to determine the facts or to determine the law. It is the judge who does that. So the judge, he or she, will ask the questions and will set the parameters for the law and also for facts. And that's very interesting because that approach we see now in the commercial courts over time that have developed. So that was, I found this very interesting because as I was thinking about why are commercial courts different, what is it about them that is different from any other normal high court which has jurisdiction to try commercial matters. So this is the meeting point of the adversarial and the inquisitorial system is the commercial court. Another meeting point which has diluted this difference is international arbitration. And again, because international arbitration has developed as an alternative, initially it was an alternative, it still is, an alternative to litigation, it has allowed a flexibility and freedom of evolution. And the evolution has taken place by taking things from the common law system, taking things from the civil law system. And this was because of necessity, because obviously all the arbitration lawyers or academics, professors or scholars were not from the English-speaking world. There are some of the top arbitration lawyers, in fact many of them are from France or Switzerland or Sweden, and they don't either speak English nor do they follow the common law system. So of necessity, arbitration had to include the various approaches to law which we see. So that was another meeting point of both the adversarial and the inquisitorial system.
We in the subcontinent used to think in binary terms. Something is either good or bad, relevant or irrelevant, proper or improper. So I read in the book that we hear this type of thinking. The influences coming from neighboring country. There was a garden, and there was a garden. Chart read was made, the line was drawn, if something is good or something is bad. And we have not learned to harmonize our thing. As you were mentioning about Chinese perspective, they have worked so much, they have written books on developing harmony. And they narrate and trace their history of harmony for 5,000 years. So we need to inculcate that type of thing. That we need to blend that kind of wisdom in our thinking here. We want to succeed as well.
On that note, a slight digression, it's not an anecdote, it's not substantiated, but on the internet you find that one of the British statesmen, Dr. Shayar, if you remember, I forget his name, but the one who came to the subcontinent in 1800s, and he went back to England, and in the House of Lords, he stood up and he said, I have seen a land where the educational and spiritual heritage of the people is so rich that the only way, if we are going to conquer them, is if we impose our language on them. Because once we impose our language on them, only then can we dilute their heritage and their culture. So modern scientists say that we have what is called genetic memory, like our genes, our cells, they also have memory, which means our memory is not just what is in our brain and what we acquire once we enter the world. We bring the memory of many generations before us. That's what scientists are now discovering. And so if we have the genetic memory, that means that heritage actually is inside us if we take the time and we recognize that we should explore this. End of digression. The third point, which brings together this, the merging of the various legal traditions, is now a new area which is called international mediation. I don't know if in the last week anybody has mentioned to you about mediation, but actual institutional mediation. It's not part of what we're going to do today, but at the end, after we look at an overview of the commercial courts around the world and also of arbitration, I will spend just 5 minutes to apprise you of what is happening in the world and the latest developments in mediation. Because in the Western world, in the industrialized economy, where arbitration became popular since the beginning of the last century, the 1900s, it has evolved over 100 years. About 30 years ago, mediation started becoming a rival to arbitration because arbitration started getting rigid and becoming bound by the same limitations that litigation was. So we'll just look at that towards the end. Today's overview, we will look at the interface between commercial courts and arbitration. I have picked out just 3 jurisdictions because of the proximity. So India, of course, and then England because we follow their system, and then Singapore because, again, regionally for us, our now model is no longer England, it is actually Singapore, because Singapore has become the center in the Asian region for commerce and for trade. So you will find in front of you handouts. Ashan, if there's one for Dr. Shariar, could you give him one also? And we look at those. So, why do you think, there's so much talk about commercial courts. Why is having a separate commercial court better than improving the legislation or existing structure of high courts? Does anybody have any ideas? I mean, why should we have separate courts? Why can't we just improve? Or why have the countries who have commercial courts, why didn't they just improve their existing civil procedure codes or their existing infrastructure for high courts? That's something that was going through my mind, like why commercial courts? I think why commercial courts, for the first reason that I mentioned, that it actually brings together the different approaches of the continental and the common law system. Secondly, looking at the experience of the countries which have successful commercial courts, the primary reason is that they get together existing judges who then specialize, as you are now doing, in a particular area of law, which is commerce. And because the needs of commerce are very different from the rest of the areas of law, not only because commerce itself is very fast-paced, it's fast-paced, it's very complex, it has very wide types, and the nature of it is very extensive, not only because of that, but because after the Second World War, when the World Bank, IBRD as it was then, when they all got together, they realized that the best way to affect peace in the world was through trade. And so that was the whole motivation primarily, was to effect peace through trade. And we know that now, that a number of the countries who may war with each other, we know fairly safely and securely that, inshallah, there will never be a third world war, because we are too dependent on each other as countries because of all our trade. So you see this you see this interesting parallel existence where countries like France is opposed to Yemen, Russia supports Yemen, Syria is fighting a war with the ISIS, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain. You see all these countries and we read about it in the newspapers that they have wars, but then 3 times a year they also have an arms fair in Dubai and all these countries buy weapons from each other. That's also commerce. So that is also commerce. So the reason why we look at commercial courts and why they are so unique and different is primarily, one, that they bring this meeting ground, two, that you get a body of expertise which you would not have normally in a high court judge, who would be a generalist, would not be a specialist. Three, of course, is the fact that commercial courts can deal with international arbitration much more effectively than a high court. And why then is arbitration so important? Arbitration is important because almost 100% of all international commercial cases have arbitration as their dispute resolution clause. You will never see any international contract, whether it's CPEC, whether it's construction, whether it's a EPC, engineering, procurement, construction, or sale of goods with a litigation clause. You will not see that anymore. That's why commercial courts and arbitration are meshed together and why they go together so closely. The final is that the commercial courts, the final reason why they are different and successful is because the countries that establish these commercial courts then have the chance to be flexible about procedure, which is what we are trying to do here as well, through amending the CPC, through drafting an entire new law that will enable these commercial courts to operate. So it has given a flexibility of that. Let's look at now the handouts and just look at an overview of that. Yes.
When there is a provision of arbitration clause in the agreement, whether it shall depend upon the choice of the parties, or will have to go to a particular court, or to a particular arbitrator. That's it. They have not mentioned any name of any other.
Whether it was informal, whether it was an institution that would conduct it. And so one of the parties, they argued that this is not a valid arbitration clause because we have no details. The English court upheld it and they said this is a valid arbitration clause. Arbitration in London. So we will come to that when we look at arbitration. Let's just look at the commercial courts first. The commercial courts, how do I move this? England, as I said, is unusual. I'm not going to read through all of this because you have it in front of you and you can look at it later, but I will speak slowly and pause just to give you a chance to read it. But just to say in terms of the history, England, as you very well know now because I keep using it as anecdotes and as a story. By the way, you know the story that the anecdote I shared with you last night about the judge? There's a really scholarly article written on that, and the title of the article, I will share that with you later, the title is called Mr. Justice Lawrence. He was the judge who took 1 year to finally deliver a one-page judgment, which was completely wrong. The article is called Mr. Justice Lawrence, the true begetter of the English commercial court, meaning that it was because of this one man. And it's actually it's very sweet because we think always that if one person started something so amazing, he must have been like a guide, that one man changed the course of history and started a whole country. Here, the man was so bad at what he did that it led to something that turned out to be very good. But there's a very, very good article written on that by one of the world's leading arbitration specialists called Johnny Wieder. So I will share that with you later. So England, as we know, They set it up in 1895. Other countries, and we're looking at India and Singapore, much more recent, both in 2015. But their experiences have been very different, and the trajectory of their success has also been very different. India, in a sense, is one of the mistakes that we must, and you especially must not make, is to take India as a model. So we need to study India as a model of the commercial courts, but not necessarily the model that we need to adopt just because we have a shared culture or we have a shared language. We need to, the reason in fact we should study the Indian model is to see where they went wrong. Because they have gone wrong. They have had problems. Singapore, of course, is not comparable because we have India with over 1 billion population, and Singapore has a population of 5 million, out of which 60% are actually expatriates. So it has a very small population. It had an amazing leader who was very authoritative, Lee Kuan Yew, and so the way they were able to effect laws and implement them meant that their success obviously is not so surprising. You know about Singapore that if you are found to be chewing gum and you throw chewing gum on the road, do you know that about Singapore? So in Singapore, the laws were so strict. In 1960s, my own father, who was in the Pakistan Navy, he tells us that when he went to Singapore, 1968, it was like what he says would be the equivalent of a slum in Pakistan. Maybe those bastis that are near a city was very, very dirty, stagnant water, a lot of disease, a lot of poverty. But 1964, when their leader Lee Kuan Yew separated from Malaysia and they became independent, he used an iron hand to first of all clean the country. And part of the cleaning of the country was these laws which were unforgiving. So if chewing gum was banned, why? And we think, why would chewing gum be banned? The reason chewing gum is banned because people, when they eat chewing gum, they throw it on the pavements. In Pakistan, we don't have many pavements, but in these countries, there are proper pavements. What happens is, these pavements they have black marks everywhere. I know that from England because I lived in London for about 20 years, and every month, the amount of money that the British government has to spend on these machines in order to wipe the chewing gum, I often think, why don't they apply Singapore's laws? Singapore law started by saying that if you are seen to be throwing chewing gum on the ground, you will have a $50 fine. It went from $50 to $500, and now it is imprisonment just for chewing gum. And what happened? Within months, there was no chewing gum on the ground. It is so clean. And inshallah, one day you will go to Singapore because the Singapore government and the court, the international court, is very open to partnerships with different commercial courts in the region. So you will see for yourself. But this is the point I'm making is that this is what happens when you are confident in the law and you are confident in applying it. It's similar to when the new government came and you saw that they imposed a fine of 200 rupees for anybody on a motorcycle not wearing a helmet. And the first few months we saw the change. People were wearing helmets. Whether or not it was a motorcycle helmet is a different thing, but their heads were covered because the police was enforcing it. After a few months, when the police became relaxed, people stopped wearing it. So as judges, you have tremendous amount of authority and power to impose laws that are good. And if we will succeed in this venture in the commercial court, a lot of it really depends on you personally. How strong you will be in imposing and enforcing the law that will be the basis of your work. So that was the history of, somebody mentioned at the beginning of the week on what kinds of cases, how do you define commercial? Do you now, you've got a good sense of what is commercial, or are there views of what should be commercial or not, or is it still open-ended in your minds? What is your view?
Something is we get clarity, but still practically we have to face difficulty. Now we understand that there should be document in written form regarding business partnership, and enforcement of that contract will come into court. In practically, if we see civil courts, there are a lot of cases where one party is industrial zone, other is private person, and matter regarding land disputes.
Yes.
If they come our court, we definitely will burden.
Yes. And that is the answer. The answer is there is no one definition of commercial. It really will depend on the kinds of cases that you get. And in the types of cases in India, when you have time, you will read that the Indian Supreme Court was faced with the same problem because it was a property dispute of immovable property. Yesterday, Faisal Naqvi Sahab had said that over 70%, as you have seen in your experience, of cases pertain to property. But when does property become a commercial dispute? Those parameters change, and they will. And for these countries, both England, Singapore and India, it has evolved, and in the more recent situation of India, it is still being defined. So for example, in England, when they started, they adopted as commercial what was the most logical and the most common. So all kinds of tax or commercial transactions, import, export. But over the years, they also realized that now commercial life has become very complex. And so recently, for example, in 2015, they broadened the definition of commercial to also include financial markets. Because financial markets and their disputes, they pertain to a language that is completely foreign to us. It's not English, it's not Chinese. It is the language of finance. So many decades ago, when we first heard of futures, I mean, we had heard of shares, bonds, government bonds, stock. But then we started hearing of futures. When the financial crash happened in 2008, it was all on futures and derivatives. And for a normal layman, even for educated people, we didn't know what derivatives or futures were. And I spoke to many bankers at that time. They didn't know what futures and derivatives were. We have is it BitCurrency, paperless money. So all these things that invent with commerce and with electronic exchanges, it means that correspondingly the law has to constantly change, and definitions have to constantly be revisited and reviewed. So that's the same thing. No country has one definition of what commercial is.
But we are talking about miseries and difficulties of a businessman. Whatever the business is conducted at a commercial place. Now, for question arises about the property of the title of the property, and whether this court has not done the same property, has purchased the property for commercial purposes.
Yes.
We want to run a business there.
Yes.
You cannot come to the commercial court.
In England or Singapore and India, you could. If the property has been purchased for commercial purposes, then you could. Now, what are commercial purposes? That will depend on a case-to-case basis.
The nature of transaction is altogether different. That is a pure civil nature.
It is a civil nature, but it has a commercial element in it.
Purpose.
So that was the question that came before the Indian Supreme Court, that if the property is going to be used for a commercial purpose, whether or not it arose out of a civil transaction, it now has evolved into a commercial use.
मैडम पहले इब्तदाई तौर पर कोई ना कोई तो डेफिनेशन देनी पड़ेगी ताकि रिविजिट होती रहे. अगर हम स्टार्ट में नहीं देंगे तो अनार्की फैल जाएगी. हर बंदा अपनी डेफिनेशन जज कर लेगा ना, ये कमर्शियल है ये नहीं है. इब्तदाई तौर पर देंगे, जो उसके प्लस माइनस आएंगे उसके बाद ऐड होता जाएगा.
बिल्कुल ऐसा ही होगा. And that's why the working group that is going to draft the actual law is going to look at all the definitions from commercial courts around the world. and then study that which definitions are encompassing, all encompassing, and which definitions actually fit the kind of usage that we will require in Pakistan.
Can we define commercial like this? Transaction in any agent which can be valued in terms of money. That is called transaction. Similarly, commercial definition of commercial cases, any transaction between the parties which involve the commercial transactions.
But how do you define commercial?
Proposed definition.
Yes,
This is not exact definition.
yes. Probably the definition that will come will be something like this, because the whole problem is how do you define commercial?
Commercial.
So the most we can do is we can elaborate and say any transaction which is of commercial in nature will be a commercial.
Already, ma'am, the definition of commerce is
Yes,
available.
yes,
The business which involve your mental capacities, like banking,
yes,
riders, that is commerce. Trading like buying and selling goods, that is trading. And commerce is different from trading in such like terms that any business which involve to use your mental capacities, intelligentsia, this is commerce.
But what has happened, you're right, but what has happened in, for example, England is that because these commercial dealings have become so specialized that they have now bifurcated, and so banking, certain things are not included in commercial because they will have their own tribunals, they will have their own specialized courts. So that is, there's no one answer, but as you said, it will start from somewhere and then according to our needs, it will evolve.
But it will create many problems if one businessman is sitting and doing his business at a particular place. And some gravel comes there and took his possession and dispossess him forcefully. Then we will be thinking that whether this court is going to get this matter or not. Whether this we should go to the civil court or criminal court in this regard.
Yes.
Because he has already, remedies are already available to him.
Yes,
But so far as his business is concerned, we are concerned with the business.
yes.
If that entity is business entity, then I think this court should have got the jurisdiction.
Yes.
Decide all certain
Right.
issues concerning that particular business.
Yes, and I think that is something that over the years you will develop through case law. So initially there will be a confusion as if the situation that you mentioned, a party who has been dispossessed of his property may be confused. Do I take him to the criminal court? Do I go here? But as case law develops, and as Justice Jawad had said on the first day, that and like the same situation we see in England and in Singapore, that any high court judge can suo moto also advocate and define that this is a case that should go to the commercial court, and so it will be allocated to the commercial court.
Another suggestion, there must be a definition of a key person in the commercial activities. Every person who is involved in the commercial activities doesn't come in the definition of commercial courts. I
So,
think so.
Does that mean you're saying that if a person does not come in the definition of aggrieved person,
Yes.
he cannot then bring, or can he not come to the commercial
Commercial
court?
court.
Or can a
Yes.
court not force him to come?
The person who is conducting commercial activities cannot be defined as a dispute of commercial court.
So the other side of this, of what you're saying is, what we see in,
मैम ये अग्रीव पर्सन की डेफिनेशन बड़ी वास्ट हो जाएगी, हर बंदा कहेगा मैं भी अग्रीव हूँ।
मैं भी एग्री हूँ, ये डिफाइन होनी चाहिए, फिर इसको
नहीं, ये होनी नहीं चाहिए।
Yeah.
there must be
I
a
think-
limited definition.
the way to actually not make it too wide is not to define it. And then it will be defined on a case-to-case basis.
Yes.
And that will then, that again, the definition will evolve. So for example, one of the things in arbitration, one of the limits of arbitration was, as you know, arbitration is consensual.
Yes.
Both the parties, or the parties to an arbitration have to consent to arbitration, otherwise they cannot arbitrate. But the problem comes now if two parties are in an arbitration.
Yes.
One party wants to freeze the assets of the other party, those assets are in a bank or with a third party, that third party has not indicated a consent to arbitration, can you force the third party to freeze the assets like a bank or not? But the party to the arbitration will say, well, this part, I am aggrieved, so you have to be able to stretch out the hand of the law and freeze those assets. In England and Singapore, they now allow that. So there are cases where the commercial court can actually make a decision and impose an order on a third party who is not a party to the arbitration if the assets or the subject matter of the arbitration has any connection with this third party. So again, that has evolved over the years. Initially, it was very clear and the boundaries were very strict that only parties to an arbitration will actually proceed in an
Definitely
arbitration.
you have read the Indian Commercial Code Act 2015. What is your opinion about that act, whether it is exhaustive or not? So that we can.
Yes, it is a good act because they again have looked at the models of Singapore and England. So they in that respect, they have done the groundwork for us. So we should definitely study that act because they have looked at the other models. And again, being a common law system, we have the shared legal heritage. So I think it's a very useful act.
Yes.
The criticisms against the act are actually amendments that they made. So there are few things which are also listed in. One of the things they did was that initially judges to the commercial court were appointed by the Chief Justice, by the government in consultation with the Chief Justice of the High Court. They have now eliminated that requirement and they have said that the government alone can appoint anyone, any judge they want as a commercial court judge. That means that if there's that takes away, one, the independence of the judiciary, because that means that suddenly it's gone into the hands of the executive, so the judiciary is no longer independent, and that creates a lot of problems when you're filing, and especially a judge who has been appointed solely by the government. What is the chance of him or her giving a judgment against the government of that state? So the starting point is that the judge is compromised.
Even political people may be pointed as
Yes. So there are obstacles like this. One of the big, really unique features of commercial courts are, we will come to that, is case management. So the Indian Commercial Court Act also had a very tight and a very well thought out plan for case management. But since 2015 to date, 2020, they have not managed to impose it, which shows that those are the problems, and we may also face those problems. But having India's experience, we may not face those problems because we can learn from it and we can either circumvent it or preempt it so that we can resolve those problems without having to go through it ourselves. So those kinds of issues are there.
Madam?
Yes.
जो लॉ जो डेवलप करने जा रहे हैं, इसमें एक क्लास ये भी होनी चाहिए, जो टैक्स पेयर है, फाइलर है, जो भी कंपनी हमारी कंट्री में, और जो नॉन फाइलर है उस पर कोई फाइन या जो वो नॉन फाइलर है वो ना आ सके, उसको बेनिफिट्स ना मिले, ताकि सारे वो टैक्स पेयर जो हैं, जो हमारे मुल्क को जो भी कंपनी आए या जो आए, वो उनको पता हो कि यहाँ पे टैक्सेस का निज़ाम भी बेहतर है, ताकि वर्ल्ड बैंक का जो ये है कि हमारी रिकवरी ये टैक्स क्लास भी होनी चाहिए.
बिल्कुल दुरुस्त, बहुत अहम है.
ये कमर्शियल कोर्ट में जाने से पहले वो बंदा डिफॉल्टर ना हो, ब्लैक लिस्टेड ना हो एफपीआर.
So there is the Ministry of Commerce started an initiative about 4 or 5 years ago, and they set up an authority, a regulatory authority called the Trade Dispute Resolution Organization, TDRO. The purpose of TDRO was to be an organization that did exactly this. It doesn't have powers to go and search or impose laws, but it has a forum where people can bring cases which they will then direct to the concerned tribunal or the concerned officer. And also one of the things they do, which is very good, is they have a list of like a blacklist and a whitelist. So people who are tax defaulters or people who are not paying tax, they will name those companies. And so that means immediately as a judge or even as a aggrieved party, you know that, oh, this company has this problem also. So, which is very similar to, if you remember, you know that in the history of Islam, initially, what used to happen, there were no jails, there was no punishment. What was the punishment? That the person who committed the sin, he would have to come in public, and then the public would be gathered, and then everybody would be told, look, this is what he has done. And that would be enough punishment for the person, because that means in society, you're immediately isolated. So it's that kind of thing that slowly laws also, we don't need to have any strict laws saying that you must throw them in jail. In fact, if you throw them in jail, the world will never know. Whereas if you keep them in the public and you say, this company or this person, this is what they've done, people will immediately, it will be like the effect of COVID. Somebody sneezes and we all step back. We know somebody has committed a crime and it's in public and they are shamed and they are named, nobody will want to associate with them.
Yes.
So that's an interesting approach. We're running short of time. I'm going to, you'll see there's a structure of the court. So as a, yes.
I can take 5 minutes, that's fine. You want to
Eat
take it?
into your time?
That's fine.
I wouldn't dare. No. No, you have very important things to say. And that's why I printed it out. Just to say just two things I will mention are the case management conference. I've listed it out. I've put some salient points so you will see that. That's something that gives a lot of power to the judges. You will have that. And that is where the continental system comes in. Because in the adversarial system, you see, the parties would decide. I'm going to show these documents, I'm going to request these documents. Here we don't have, we don't request documents so much. We show our documents, the other party shows. In England or Singapore, they will request it. But in the commercial court, the advantage is that the judge directs the procedure. And that means you can save time, you can save cost, and you can direct the parties. So you can actually, as a judge, you will have the authority and the flexibility to say, I want your case management statement from one side, the plaintiff, and from the defendant, and then you will be able to say, because parties will not always agree. That's the reality. One party says, all right, these are the documents, or this is the disclosure I want. Like one party will say, I want all the documents, paper documents, I also want all the emails. The other party will say, no, I've got millions of emails. That's a big problem now facing in electronic litigation is the e-documents and electronic disclosure. That's a huge problem because emails, we write 1 million emails in a month. And sometimes parties will say, we want to see all the emails. So the other party will say, but that they have no relevance. That's where the judge comes in. That's where a judge can actually impose limits. Time limits, document disclosure limits, evidence limits. What kind of evidence you'll get. So one of the big successes of commercial courts has been the case management conference, CMC, that they talk about. The other, of course, is the interface with arbitration. And if you come to that, in England, the commercial court is the supervisory court. They all come to that. In Singapore, again, the law changed recently so that arbitration applications that used to go to the High Court, they now come solely to the Singapore International Commercial Court. This is on the right side, you see. Interim measures. See, that's the approach that is in the authority of the judge. Whether you are going to give interim measures to interrupt an arbitration or whether you are going to give it to actually assist an arbitration. Those are really technical things that when you come to those, you will see. But those are the points where arbitration and commercial courts meet. One is interim measures, because that's something that they need immediately. In interim, for example, I have now a foreign client. They have a case against a Pakistani company. they are based abroad. Their concern is that they have a dispute resolution clause. The arbitration is in a different country. Their concern is that the assets are here in Pakistan. So they say that if we start an arbitration, we're abroad, we have no control of what the opposing party will do with their assets. They may dissipate the assets. So we need to freeze those assets, because otherwise, if we go through the arbitration, which may take a year, and we win, the other party may no longer have any assets. So we won't, even if we win, we will not be able to actually recover our losses. Interim measures are very important. In the Pakistan Arbitration Act at the moment, I mean, it's only the court that gives it. The solution that other countries adopted was to give the commercial court the power so that they could then order interim measures in order to facilitate the arbitration, not to stop it. And the final interface between arbitration and commercial courts is, of course, enforcement. Once you get an arbitration award, how successfully can you actually enforce it in the country or in the place where you want to enforce it and get your compensation? And so enforcement is where the commercial courts, again, because they are experts, they have the expertise, and because time limits are faster, so everything is more fluid, it's more punctual, it's more regular, so enforcement also becomes quicker. And that then facilitates arbitration, which facilitates commerce, and so on and so forth. So that is the thing. Coming back to, let's look at just the arbitration element of what we were looking at in the overview. This is the history. You can look at the history when you have time. The scope. So, sir, what you had, the question you had raised was, could you repeat that again about not knowing who the arbitrator is? Or
there is no clause of arbitrator as mentioned in the agreement. Then how it should be determined that who should be the arbitrator, or whether the matter should be given to the court, or with the consent of the parties. Let's say the parties do not agree upon a particular person, then what will happen? There is clause of arbitrator.
Yes.
But there is no mentioning of specific person or court.
Yes.
That will be relevant.
Yes. So what tends to happen in practice is you have two kinds of arbitrations. In international arbitration, you will have what is called ad hoc arbitration. Ad hoc arbitration means that you make the rules as you go along. They're not decided beforehand. But those rules are not your rules. You're not actually inventing the rules. All it means is that if there's an ad hoc arbitration between you and I, we have not decided who the arbitrator is, but we have an ad hoc arbitration, we will then decide which arbitration rules to follow. So we may say, well, we will follow the Pakistan Arbitration Act 1940. You may say, I don't want to follow that, that's very outdated. In which case, we will have to then, and usually parties will agree on a third party who is an appointing party. So we will go to maybe the Lahore Chamber of Commerce and we'll say, we cannot decide on the arbitrator, can you decide for us? And then they will decide for us and we will consent to that. So in an ad hoc arbitration, we choose the rules once we reach the stage. The other type of arbitration is institutional. Institutional arbitration means there will be a dispute resolution clause that will say, for example, the clause that said arbitration in London under LCIA. LCIA is the London Court of International Arbitration. Or sometimes you have a dispute resolution clause that simply says arbitration under ICC. That in itself, that means that we have consented to having all our procedural rules and our law governed by the International Chamber of Commerce. It gets more complex because in any one arbitration you can have up to 5 different laws that will apply, because there is the main contract between us that will have a governing law. The arbitration clause, even if it's these 3 words, arbitration in London, that constitutes a separate agreement. It's an agreement within an agreement. That may have a separate law. then in that agreement there will be a law that will apply to procedure. There will be another law which may be different that will apply to the substance, to the merits of the dispute. So all of that comes under arbitration, and you will inshallah become experts in that one day, and it's a fascinating area. So that's how you would do it. How you would decide on an arbitrator or a tribunal is either, sometimes, and that also happens in practice, I will appoint one arbitrator of my choice, you will appoint an arbitrator of your choice, and then we will give authority to those two arbitrators to appoint a chairperson. That will be, and that's also very common. So the two arbitrators will appoint a neutral third person. Or if we feel like we don't trust the choices, then we will go to one of the institutions on the spot. That's how it is. Any other questions on arbitration or just the interface? We won't go through that. You have this, you can look at it. But before I wind up,
Extra copy.
do we have extra copies, Asha? Yes? Please, yes. We have extra. There's one that's not bound, and I'm very happy to give you my copy also. But it might have things written on it. There's one. Do you only need one extra copy? Does everyone else have a copy?
Yeah.
Has anyone else given you copies of anything? Did you get copies from any other? I'm so happy. I thought this is because it makes a difference when you have so much information coming to you. But if you get something, then it means that even next year or the year after, you'll have it with you, so it's useful. I'm glad. The one thing that I'm sorry I couldn't, I thought about it too late, I couldn't add it in. This is, I found this on the internet, it's very useful. It's a flow chart of the Singapore International Commercial Court. And it gives you a very good sequence of what happens. So at which point, when you put in a statement of claim, then the defendant responds, at which point you have the case management conference, at which point you get evidence, at which point you get disclosure, and then go into trial. So
ये नहीं है हमारे पास.
ये इसमें नहीं है, मुझे देर हो गई, मगर
ये इसकी वो पिक्चर ले लेते हैं.
जी हाँ,
वो ग्रुप में शेयर कर दें.
ये this is called electronic advancement technology. ये ले लीजिए, तो ये काफी कारगर है.
नहीं हमारे तो
इसमें जजमेंट आर्डर होंगे कमर्शियल कोर्ट के, वो भी टेम्पलेट आर्डर थे मिल जाएंगे मीडिया के या पीडीएल
Orders, judgments.
बिल्कुल मिल सकते हैं. मैं सबसे कहूँगी कि आप
Model judgments.
हाँ बिल्कुल model judgments.
इंग्लिश कोर्ट्स की मिल सकती है जजमेंट्स.
इंग्लिश कोर्ट्स की जजमेंट. अच्छा, मैं आपको याद है कि शुरू में, अब हम खत्म हो गया. थैंक यू. पहले मैं आप लोगों का शुक्रिया अदा करूं कि आप लोगों ने अपनी तवज्जो दी, मुझे बहुत शुक्रिया आपका. याद है आपको पहले दिन जब मैंने बोला था कि वो है एक द स्टैंडर्ड इंटरनेशनल फोरम फॉर सीफॉक, वो तो आप लोगों को अभी से देखना शुरू कर देना चाहिए, क्योंकि सीफॉक में
ऐड नहीं है, पाकिस्तान उसमें ऐड नहीं है.
मैंने जस्टिस जवाद हसन को बोला है, तो कह रहे थे जैसे ये आप लोगों का फॉर्मलाइज हो जाएगा ना कोर्ट, और वो कोर्ट उसमें शायद वक्त लगेगा, मगर मेंबरशिप तो आपको बाद में मिल जाएगी, मगर वेबसाइट तो खुली है. तो वेबसाइट की बहुत कारगर चीज़ ये है कि उसमें सारे जो मुख्तलिफ ममालिक मेम्बरान हैं, और ये हैं 40 से ज़्यादा. हाँ, SIFOCC, सीफॉक उसको बोलते हैं.
स्टैंडिंग इंटरनेशनल
जी बिल्कुल.
तो लॉर्ड थॉमस ने उसको पर
लॉर्ड थॉमस और सिंगापुर के चीफ जस्टिस सुंदरेश मेनन, इन दोनों का ब्रेन चाइल्ड था, और अभी भी वो उसको ज़्यादा रन करते हैं. और फिर इनकी मुख्तलिफ मुल्कों में हर साल 2 साल बाद मीटिंग्स होती हैं, जिसमें सारे जो मेंबर मुल्कों के कमर्शियल कोर्ट्स के जजेस हैं वो आ जाते हैं. इसकी मेंबरशिप कमर्शियल कोर्ट इंफरादी तौर पे नहीं ले सकते, कोर्ट को लेनी होती है. और मेंबरशिप की इनकी कोई वो फीस नहीं है, मगर कहते हैं कि जब मेंबर्स जो भी जजेस आए वो आए अपने खर्चे पे, तो वो फिर हुकूमतें जो है वो फिर भेजती हैं मुख्तलिफ जजेस को.
हम इंडिविजुअल तो जा सकते हैं,
वैसे जा सकते, बिल्कुल जा सकते हैं. और इसका फ़ायदा ये है कि वेबसाइट पर ही आपको बहुत सारे स्टैंडर्ड फॉर्म, ये जो आप कह रहे हैं ना, मॉडल जजमेंट्स, मॉडल क्लॉजेज, आपको डेवलपमेंट्स ब्राज़ील में क्या हो रहा है, कमर्शियल कोर्ट में स्पेन में क्या हो रहा है, ये सारी चीज़ें मिल जाती हैं इसी में सीफॉक में से. तो वो आपको वो बड़ी कारगर एक ये वसीला है. बहुत शुक्रिया आपका डॉक्टर शहरियार.